Then also it is important to know 1H. There was W number 3, then that's H. There's only 1H out of 7W and 1H. This is the H. How? How did it happen? Okay, it happened. And how did it happen? See, many things in your life, it does happen. And you succeed. Sometimes you fail. Sometimes you get sick. And all these problems and troubles and needs and issues that we face, these are what happened. Something had happened. So something that had happened, we need to know. And then you need to know, how did it happen? So that's kind of episode. And the people and characters. These are the people, person that are involved in the history. And the next W number 4 is who. W number 5 is why. Who and why. Actually, number 5 is who. Number 6 is whom, and then why. So number 4 and 5 and 6 there. Who did what to whom? When something happened and you want to ask who did to whom, we already looked at what, so that's small there. And who did to whom? Because sometimes there's the things that you do to yourself. But most history, the narrative, it involves more than one person, right? There's a main character or initiator or the leading person or the center character, whatever you call it. There's a person of major role. Then there are people who plays minor role. And then there are people who does something, and then there are people who has been or had been affected by the things that another person do to that person. So you're going to be at the receiving end, and then there's a giving end. So giving and receiving. So who to whom? You need to look at these two characters. Who's doing what and what happened to other people. That's whom. And then the key thing, that will be the major question of doing history. Why did it happen? Why did it happen? The answer to that question is the key thing. Sometimes you don't know. Then you have to guess. You have to do educated guess. That's what the science is about. That's what the good historians do. You do the best educated guess on why. And you try to provide all the evidences to support your claim, your thesis, your understanding, your interpretation. So that's where the interpretation is involved when you try to figure out why. And that's going to be the key element in doing and understanding history. Especially when you do the church history, that why comes in the two areas. There's a human side and divine side. Human characters and divine characters. Divine characters are unseen. It's not visible. Human characters, you can interview, you can ask, and they'll say, assuming that they'll say the right things and honest things. But sometimes people they don't say honest things, and people sometimes say the things that they don't want to say, or they didn't even think about saying it. So, it cannot be 100% trust what they actually say. That's the problem with doing history. You cannot trust 100% of what they have said. They can lie, they can distort, they can twist, they can omit certain things, or they can add certain things. And also the memory is not perfect. Memory can be erased, added, twisted, and so on. So this is the human side. But still, you're going to ask why this person did the things he or she did. And there is that divine aspect, divine domain. Why did it happen? Because of God. So when we say because of God, it's not sometimes. It's not, exclusive to certain particular events. We believe as Christians, He is always involved in history, especially in church history. Whether it's a good church history, whether it's a bad church history, divine presence is there. Divine involvement is there. So there's always, we assume, all good Christians, they assume that divine, why, the reason, the intention is always there in human history, the church history especially. So our job as church historians is to try to figure out why did God allow that to happen sometimes, or God intended that happen. Sometimes God planned or enforced that to happen. Because as we read the Bible, as we understand our Christian lives, there are things God allows to happen, even though He's not have any direct involvement. Sometimes God allows that to happen, and God sometimes designs and plans and executes something to happen. So that's two different things in this end and that end. But in between, there are something of that mixtures, which sometimes it's not very easy to understand or easy to discern. That's going to be the key word for us as we do the church history. We are trying to discern the God's involvement, the God's will. That's asking, why did it happen? What was the intention? What was God's plan? And that's very difficult part. It's not even art. It's beyond the science. And it takes a very mature Christian understanding or discernment, wisdom, to be able to discern what God's intention is, what God's plan is. That's what we are going to do, what we are trying to do. I don't think we can, never be perfect in making that discernment, but we'll try, keep trying, and get to a certain understanding. Then, any good history will ask that question. So, major part of history is asking that why, and then wherefore then, and then wherefore now. As a result of something happened in the past that had been, for example, there's a Reformation. And right after Reformation, what are the changes? What are the implications of that, the event? What had happened as a result of that thing, that event, Reformation, the consequences? There are many consequences, very key, important changes, the shifts. Some positive, some negative. Never in human history, something that human did is 100% positive. That has never been. That's the reality. Ideally, we want it to be 100%. But since we human we are not perfect. Because we are not perfect, what we do can never be perfect. Any good intended events in the history that will never bring 100% positive outcome. So wherefore then we ask and try to see the positives and negatives, both of them. Some historians are so blinded and self-sufficient or self-praising that it's not the key good word. They are self-righteous. That they think whatever the church did, whatever the good Christians did at the time of history will bring the only positive outcomes. That if you have that perspective, you're going to fail. You're going to fail in not doing history. Our assumption is, even with a very good intention, with a good, episode, there's always something that's negative, something that is going to be lacking, something that falls short of the ideal. That's who we are. And as historians, you need to acknowledge that you cannot be perfect. Because that gives you a lesson, telling you that you are never perfect. I'm never perfect. Whatever I do with the good intentions may bring some negative effects, negative result, negative outcomes, in spite of my good, pure intention. See, that's who we are. That's what the human history is. So a church is a good entity, but the human church on earth, it is never perfect. So as you try to see the significance, implication, and consequences of a certain event, you want to try to see that. And then now, how that event that happened 400 years ago in 17th century, the Reformation, how it is going to affect us today. And we're not looking at that far, not 400 years. we are looking at 1900 and so on. So it's pretty recent. That's why it's a modern history. So what happened before, about 100 years ago, 50 years ago, how is it going to affect us today, and looking to the future. That's wherefore. So that's not 2W, is 1W. So that's W number 7. Okay. So try to remember 7W1H of doing history or doing analysis of any narrative. So you can apply this right away to your own life today. See? Yeah, where and when? What happened? And who's involved? Who's involved? Who's the main character? And how is going to affect whom? And how did it happen? But most importantly, why did it happen? The human side and divine side. I mean, Christians always need to ask this. What did I do right and wrong? And what was God's plan for this? God's intention was. What was it? If you do not know, if you not know the significance and if you're not able to discern God's will on anything that's happening today to you, then you're in trouble. Actually, you're in trouble. For as a Christian, I mean, it's mandatory. But many Christians fail to ask that question. Why did it happen? And then, wherefore, as a result of it, now and then. So each topic we tackle and study, we'll try to use this basic format. Not all of them at every time, but some of them. It could be just one of them or all of them. But this basic format is the kind of key questions or key agendas that we are going to look at for each topic as we do the history of certain topic. Okay. First, we want to do the understanding of the topic itself, the terms, the concepts, and so on. So first of all, you need to understand what the topic actually is and what is it about. And then we want to have these materials to do the study, which is the resources and references. Mostly it's going to be the books and the readings on that particular subject of the topic. Then as any good historian, so you're going to need to do certain timeline, chronological, what happened and then what happened next year and then what happened next year and so on. So major people and events are going to be our consideration as we do the timeline view. Chronological order from past to the present. Okay. Then there's going to be trying to understand what the core issues are, and the concerns and even the controversies. Many things that are happened in the last 100 years or so has to do with some theological, doctrinal controversies within the church. And then again, many of the things that happened with the church last 100 years or so has to do with the controversies between the church and the secular world, or the state and the government, and so on. So that's two things. Controversies within the church, and then controversies between the church and the secular world. So that's the main, big picture that you need to have in your mind as you do the history. Then many of these subjects would have some biblical references. So we're going to look at those Bible teachings, biblical teachings about the given topics in the history. Then next we'll try to conclude each topic with looking at significance and implications for us today. We're back. Let's do this timeline, an overview. So this will give us overall big picture of the last 100 plus years of church history, the global church history. And so by doing so, we are going to cover that chronological approach of doing history. And then after that, we'll go into each topics. Okay? This is like a background. You want to know what had happened before. I mean, history does not, you cannot just start 1900 and do the history. No, that's not how it works. So we kind of go back all the way to at least to the Jesus and Apostles. Actually, when we did the church history, we went back beyond that to the history of Israel even. But we're not going to go back that far, but start with the AD year 1, the birth of Jesus Christ. And then year 65, somewhere there, 65 to 68, we don't know exactly, because the historical record is somewhat confusing. But many scholars agree on that particular year 65. So that's the most popular opinion. Anyway, Peter and Paul executed then. And then last, the gospel was written right after that, or a little before that. That's also very, in dispute. But still, we know that the gospel is written somewhere there. And that's pretty much enough. So the Gospels were written, and then it's gonna be written over and over again, because they didn't have printing, only there were hand copies, right? So they make hand copies of these Gospels and spread that around, and that's how it all began. So the first church was begun right after birth of Jesus. Death of Jesus. 40 days later, 49 days actually. 49 days later, after the Pentecost, they had this very special, event once ever in history, called the Pentecostal, the baptism of the Holy Spirit, right? And the church was born. Church of the Jerusalem was born there. That's first church ever. Official. Unofficial church would be the group of disciples gathered around Jesus, the 12, and then one kind of dismembered himself, and then they added Matthew as a 12th disciple, and then we have Paul, Saint Paul, as 13th disciple and the apostle, right? So there's the Gospels and the Acts of Apostles. These are the good historical records that we can refer to see how the church began. And then from year 70, the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple by Titus. And then in between until 300 year AD 303, the great persecution begins under Diocletian. And I'm not sure if that's the exact pronunciation, but as Diocletian, the Roman emperor, and then it gets worse and worse. So these are the period, the early church, early Christianity spread in the Asia Minors, and then it goes into the Rome, and then it faces the persecution of several, almost 200 plus years of persecution in there. And so basically the church grows slowly, sometimes explosively under persecutions by the Rome, by the people of other religion, and by also Jews. So three levels of persecutions existed at the time of early Christianity. And that persecution by the government or other religion, or no longer Jews, but other religion, is still there, right? We see that happening in the Middle East, in some socialist or communist countries like in North Korea. It's still there. So the history repeats itself, some says, but I would say this history continues itself, and it only goes underground sometimes, but it does, come up again, pops up again. So history of persecution never ended; it continues. Then there comes the age of the Christian Empire. Starting with the year 312, the conversion of Constantine, and then he later officially authorizes the Christianity to be the national religion, not just a valid legal religion, but national religion. And then, the Christianity spread from the Rome to the Roman Empire. At the time, the Roman Empire covers the most southern part of Europe and the Middle East, and then even to the East Asia, and then south to the northern Africa. So it covers the vast territory, and the Christianity being the religion of the empire is spread. Not only spread quickly, it spread artificially. So this becomes a problem. When Christianity becomes artificial, meaning humanly controlled or humanly manipulated, then that spells trouble. Christianity cannot be artificial. It has to be, always has to be divine. When human goes before God steps or goes, that's where trouble happens. So during that period and toward the great empire of Vatican Catholic Empire in Europe, to the Middle Age. See, that's where the trouble begins. This is an expansion through the empire, the Roman Empire. Then it faces Christian Middle Age. So the Roman Empire, it becomes the church itself. The church and the state kind of goes together since the Constantine. See, I'm telling you, when it becomes political, artificial, and governed by human institutions or human structures or human, without having the divine elements or even eliminating divine elements from their Christianity or the system of church, then it means a big trouble. And we see in the history. Year 590, Gregory the Great elected Pope. This Pope, at the time of Middle Age, he is above all the kings of Europe. So Pope inaugurates or gives the crown to the kings, which means he's the highest authority of the European Empire. See, Roman Empire translates into the Catholic Empire. So Latin Europe controls the Anglo-Saxon and the Romanian or Franco Europe. So there's Franco, Anglo-Saxon, and then the northern, how you call it, Swedish and Viking, and that Europe. Even the Vikings were under that big Catholic empire. See, as a result of this very corrupted church structure, they eventually come up with or end with so-called crusade, very politically motivated militant campaign. So crusade is nothing more than a politically motivated or financially motivated militant campaign. There is a certain fear about Islamic expansion coming toward the north, toward the Europe, toward the Latin Europe, Italy, Spain, Portugal, and as you look at the European map, there's a Turkey, and right from Turkey you cross the Asia Minor, and you just come into Europe, right? So they were afraid of Islamic empire growing, and even the civilization, the culture was much advanced than that of most of the Europe at the time. So that kind of caused them to have the crash between two different civilizations. There's a Christian civilization now growing, but becoming corrupt. And there's a new Islamic civilization coming from the South Turkey and expanding. See, so they said we need to recover Jerusalem. Seems like a very religiously motivated, but it wasn't. We know that. And then 1516, Erasmus publishes Greek New Testament. So that's actually people are being given a printed material. But this is not yet the kind of, printing that we are talking about today. It's handwritten. The Gutenberg is about there, right after 1516. Gutenberg, he invents that metal printing, So that's the game changer. But before then, until the Gutenberg, the Bible, the scripture was very expensive, as limited copies. It was only for the nobles and educated. So that's why the 1516 and then the year Gutenberg invented the metal printing. There was a change from the Dark Age toward Reformation and so on. See, this is during this age, it's the period of establishment of Catholic Empire. In between, there are many things that we want to look at, but this is not our subject, so we'll just go to the the next. So this is Latin, mainly Latin and Anglo-Saxon and the Franco-Europe, meaning the French, the Germans, and then Spanish, Portuguese, and the Greco-Roman. These are the groups. And then the England, they opened little late, couple hundred years later than other part of Europe. And then Vikings to the north. So it kind of spread geographically by the time. But still, this Catholic Empire becomes the major body. The church rules the land. The thing is, they kind of equated that empire, the church, Catholic Church, to the kingdom of God. That's very theological, confusion and doctrinal mistake. The empire, the government created under the Pope, is just an institution using the religion as an ideology. Ideology is the governing or the spirit of the state. Spirit of the state. The state or the nation, a country, rules the country with ideology. For America, it's democratic or democracy. Democracy is the ideology of the nation of United States of America. And another ideology would be free market or capitalism. See, those are the kind of ideology. It uses it to govern people. So the religion becomes an ideology. It becomes the spirit the government uses. This is the problem. Uses to govern its people. That's what the corruption is about. People will say, there's nothing bad about using Christianity, the religion, the church to rule the nation. Use is the problem. The Christianity is not the means, but it is the end. It's the purpose. It's the meaning. It's the value. You cannot use that to do something. It's not the means. So when anyone, even today, begins to use Christian faith, the religion, for something else, to achieve some other agenda, some other purpose, or some other, gains, then you are manipulating. You are using the religion. You are using Christianity and using God. At the end, you're using God. That's what had happened in the Middle Age in Europe. The Pope and all these kings begin to use Christianity as a tool and means to govern, to make it easy for them to rule the people. And the people begin to realize that is the case and that is not right. How? Because they begin to read the Bible. How did that happen? The paper becomes more popular, cheaper, and the printing becomes easier and faster, and they could publish hundreds and hundreds of Bible with a printing instead of writing each word and sentence. See, that's like having a computer to work on. See, today printing is so easy for us because of the computer that we have, word processors. You just type it and use the printer, click it, and it prints out. And the printing becomes the major contribution for the Christianity and then toward the Reformation. So comes the age of the Reformation. 1517, Luther posted his 95 Theses. And then toward the 1648, Peace of Westphalia ends 30 Years' War. The 30 Years' War is associated with the change is between the Catholic and the Protestant. The reason we call the people, us, Protestant, from the Catholic point of view, from the Catholic Church, these are the political enemies. Not only the religious opponents, these are the political opponents, the enemy to deal with. They're revolutionaries. They are sect, and they're heretic according to Catholic perspective. So they wanted to deal with, even using the force and the power and the military means to overcome this. I mean, to just eliminate them. And so that much impact was given to the Catholic Church by Luther, Calvin, and Zwingli, and so on. So as you look at the Calvin, he was not only a theologian and religious leader, he was also political and militant leader. See? And then you can understand the nature of Reformation. It's like a military coup today that we see. No, it's not just religious, it's political, it's militant. And so these are the time of trouble, time of struggle, time of fighting, time of severe conflict within the church. So there's a Catholic Church. There's only Catholic Church, which is only one Unitarian church. Now there's a Orthodox Church, Protestant Church. It's all divided. And the church against the church, even bleeding, fighting, killing one another under the name of God. The same God, the biblical God. And this troubles many. Even us today, it troubles us. People fighting one another in the name of religion. See, Afghanistan. We see the Afghanistan. And then it's about, it's not just the political, it's not just the militant. Underlying, there's a religious Christianity and Islam. The Taliban is Islamic extremist. And now, once they govern a state, you cannot call them terrorist or extremist. See, it becomes official. ISIS, that's why they claim them to be a state, a nation. So there's that religion playing a great part in all these conflicts going on in Afghan and the Middle East and so on. So that we see the picture of the religion against Islam against Christianity, now the church against the church. They protested against the Roman Catholic Church, see? And then Anglo-Saxon Europe versus Latin Europe. See, the Europe begins to divide itself. It was under the control of the great Pope, the leader of leaders. Now it's gone. And then they begin to divide and split and fight one another. It's not only the church against the church, it becomes the church against the state. Because the Protestant church is not a state church, while most of the Roman Catholic churches, German, France, Italy, Spain, Portugal, they had Catholic Church as a state religion. And once the Protestants protest against the Catholic, they are not only going against the Catholic Church, but they are going against the political power, the state, the nation, the government. See, this is a serious offense. That's why many of this reform leaders were persecuted and even executed. So, do you see this complexity of doing church history even at the time of Reformation? It's not the church, only the church, but it has to do with the world, the power, the state, the government, and then military power and so on. So church cannot be just itself. It cannot isolate. Then comes the age of reason and revival. As a Protestant, not only begins Reformation, but they become an establishment. Just like the Roman Catholic Church became an establishment. See the word establishment, something that has been established. See, there is a word stable right there. See, this is a very dangerous word. Church should never been stable. Should not be stable. That's my conclusion. Church is not something stable. It should be always in alert. Because, the word never been changed since the beginning of that incident in the Garden of Eden. Once they were kicked out of Eden, Adam and Eve, we're outside that stable ecology, spiritually stable ecology. That's gone. Any time in history since then, the world that we live in, the reality is unstable. While the world has never been stable, always been unstable, how can church become establishment, become stable? See, that's kind of nonsense. Doesn't make sense. But it did happen. Roman Catholic Church becomes an establishment. See? And the church, the Lutheran Church in Germany, it becomes an establishment, and the Lutheran Church becomes a national church, and the German it adopts Lutheran as its state religion. See? England, same thing. Anglican Church it's a Protestant, it's kind of mixed between the Protestant and the Catholic tradition, but still it separates itself for the political reason from the Pope, and becomes an independent state, and the Christianity becomes an establishment in England. And the history repeats itself as we see the modern church history. In the United States, until just several decades ago, until the late 20th century, in the year 90s, church became an establishment. Even though church and the state is separated, fortunately, luckily, separated from the state, the church, still, majority of American system is run by so-called evangelicals or fundamental Christians. Evangelicals and fundamental Christians are different. I mean, fundamental Christians are part of large evangelical family. But they are too different. But anyway, these fundamental Christians, so-called in the Bible Belt, and then the larger group called evangelicals, including them, and then the South. Those people in the Bible Belt and the South, these Christians are rather conservative, culturally, tradition, binding to the tradition, rather than the theology, evangelical theology. But still, they are included as evangelicals. And these people are still running the America, so-called America. Even though Democrats are mainly, they are liberal. I mean, many Christians and the Democrats are liberals, but it's not like all the Christians who are Democrats are liberals. That's not the case. Many Democrats are still evangelicals. So evangelicals majority of evangelicals belong to Republicans, but still there is still large number of groups of evangelicals within the Democratic Party as well. So the political, the inclination and this religious, inclination kind of does not exactly match yet. But it will become, Democrats will be more of non-believers, non-Christians and non-evangelicals, but more liberal Christians. It's the trend. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is that this becomes the adding to the the issue of church against the state and the church against the church. Now, as the time goes by through this time of reason and enlightenment, and then at the same time the time of revival. See, that's kind of paradox, but still, there's a period of enlightenment, and then Renaissance. Europe goes through this, and then discovery of new land, the America. All these things happens during this period, and not discovery, but the America is already discovered, and the settlement in the new land. See, as these things goes on, like a Kant. See, now the issue of religion versus science becomes another major issue that brings conflict within the church through the secular world. So at this time, the church and the secular sacred and secular kind of becomes obvious, the division. Before this, there is no solid secular context. It did not exist. But now, after the Enlightenment and then Renaissance, we have a large portion of so-called secular, but it's anti-religion or pseudo-Christianity. They take an idea from the Christianity, but it's no longer an organized or institutionalized religion. See, that's the kind of trend and flow and the narrative that we read in this period. So beginning of secularization, and then the theology becomes a big part in education. See, what it does is a church now extends and then intensifies its educational system in both Europe and in North America. So that's another kind of trend that happens at this age. So this is where the age of progress begins. The great Christian era. But before we go into further in the 20th century, more detailed timeline and the chronology, we want to look at this 18th century and 19th century so this is right before the beginning of the 19th century. By the end of 18th century, which is 1789 and so on, the key event that kind of marks what had happened in the Age of Reason and the plus Reformation. So as you see this political development, even the Enlightenment and Renaissance and then all these things are the products of Reformation. So you have to remember, Enlightenment it looks like it's against the Christian religion, but actually it is the product of the Reformation. And eventually that Enlightenment and Renaissance and understanding about the human dignity and so on ends up with the French Revolution. Even though the economic crisis, it triggered the French Revolution, but it is the mind of people that has changed it. You see, the hunger and the pandemic did happen even before these Middle Age, and it's been with the human history. There always been that hunger, then famine, and then pandemic. There was always there, and then the tyrant government, the monarchy, the oppression from the ruling class that has been there ever in history. But why the French Revolution in 18th century? The reason is because people begin to have different ideas. different ideas. Not only the ruling people, but the general public, so-called citizens. There were no citizens before, but after Reformation, there were citizens, the middle class, and the general public, the civil. These are the words that did not, the concept that did not exist before, even though there's some, some hint of that in the Greece, right? Hellenic culture. There's some democratic idea, but that was, just momentary. Now, and that has never been triggered or became an establishment, just like here. Now it becomes an establishment. Majority of people they are able to read and understand the material called Bible. As they read the Bible and being educated, now their minds, their ideas, their paradigms, their values, the change, especially the values about themselves, it had greatly changed. See, this is very important. When each person begins to find his or her own value, own dignity, and it's a big issue. Again, this all happened because of the church. Because even though the church became corrupted, became establishment and so on, they did influence the culture, the thoughts of people. And it did change the minds of people. And that people does change the history. And eventually becomes French Revolution and the birth of Republic. Today, everyone loves to use the word republic. Any so-called democratic nation, society, use the word republic. People's Republic of China, Republic of Korea, Democratic People's Republic of Korea, that's North Korea. So, other nation uses the word republic. And then they produce something called Bill of Rights. And around that time, 1793, William Carey, an English missionary, sails for India. This would be the most outstanding, significant church, the missionary ever. Almost like a first Protestant missionary that we know of, the history of. And then, same year, there's something called Festival of Reason. As the church grows, now the church is no longer a state church. people, there are the force of the secular world growing in its numbers and its ideas, and they begin to organize themselves, just like a church is organized. And then 1793, very significant event, the festival reasons, is against Christianity. And they say, we no longer want that. And Nietzsche said, God is dead. See, that was like a blasphemy at the time of Middle Age under the Roman Catholic Church. If someone said that, he would have been executed right there. But now, people is free to say that. Then year 1799, Schleiermacher publishes lecture on religion. See, these kind of changes, they begin to see Christianity as a religion. It's something that no longer culture itself. Now the religion becomes a part of culture. It's less than. So that's the change. Not only it becomes a part of the culture, there is a big force that is against the culture. So that's the end of 18th century, and now it becomes 19th century and 1804. While the society and culture is divided by those under Christianity and those are not under Christianity. And then state and the church is no longer is the same thing or equal name, but they are separated. Now, what happens is the church, the Protestant church in this case, because our focus is 90% Protestant and 10% Catholic. And that's how we do this class. I know the Catholic Church is still big entity, but no. In this particular class, we are focusing much on Protestant church history. So anyway, the Protestant church begins to organize itself in a way that it can reach out beyond its own culture. And thus, the concept of how we call the mission or missionary or overseas mission becomes very popular. It begins to arise. Later it becomes popular in 19th and 20th century. But here is the beginning of 1800, the missionary work. Because William Carey is in 1793. That's the end of 18th century, and then as we begin 19th century, it becomes very big, the very beginning of missionary zeal. So yeah, we'll continue to talk about that, picture of 19th century next week. And for today, we're gonna close here and say bye and see you guys next week. Thank you.